Guys, I promise it's not about. So, Hollow Knight Silksong is an incredible game with snappy mechanics, amazing stories, characters, world building, and exquisite OST. But a video game can have deeper meaning. It can shed light on real-world issues, make bold statements, and touch our hearts. On the channel, we usually cover the lore of Silksong, but in today's video I wanted to try something a little different and answer this question. What is Hollow Knight Silksong really about? It doesn't take long in Farloom to feel this Forsaken Kingdom's crushing weight. The all-seeing Citadel of Song casts sin into the hearts and minds of bugs and demands subservience while dangling the small hope of salvation. Here they limply lay, the castaways and the disillusioned and the used up, not sure we have anything to offer them, not even hope. The most obvious and prevalent theme in Silksong, at least to me, is oppression, how it's effectuated and its consequences. Grandmother Silk, her weaver children after, the Citadel of Song after them. Successive generations built upon and concerned with tyranny over the masses. We've got pilgrims who kill themselves through their devotion, workers who kill themselves through their labor, clerics who kill themselves through their vision. It all paints a very grim picture. There are two overarching types of oppression whose vines have woven their way into Farloom and strangle its heart: the socio-religious and the socio-economic. If you're like me, watching Hornet traipse through smelting factories, damp looms, and godly corridors reminds you instantly of 19th century Russia? The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky is sublime Russian literature I recommend if you've got the time to read its over 800 pages. Jokes aside, there's a chapter that discusses separation of church and state, what happens when one consumes the other or vice versa, and that this is the ultimate fate of religion. It can't be reconciled with government. Either it will wither and die or else consume it entirely. Reading this made me think back to Silksong. The kingdom of Farloom illustrates when the church is the state, when religion has engulfed entirely all other aspects of society, and especially in the case of Silksong, when its dogma stifles wayward thought. The Citadel of Song, described by Maskmaker as a web to ensnare bugs, and built by the Weavers to maintain Grandmother Silk's imprisonment, thrives on its religious tyranny. Through both the magic of the Needle-In that enthralls lesser minds, and through countless generations of indoctrination, the Citadel has convinced Farloom that it's the undisputed authority in matters of body and soul. Its words aren't to be questioned, its commands always to be followed. A bone-bottom lore tablet describes well the situation. Watch over these bugs born low, raised up by fervor fostered, born and caught within our web unknowing. Pilgrims and workers are told from birth that sin stains their souls, and only through penance and labor can absolution be gained. We can see real-world parallels in the religious states of the Middle Ages. At their geographical height, both Christian and Muslim empires were headed by religious institutions whose success turned them corrupt and opulent. Faith was a shield to hide their own infidelity. Power was maintained by keeping the lay people ignorant. Other examples can be found throughout history, but I definitely get some Middle Ages Holy See vibes, especially the abuse of indulgences through almsgiving. As we see, most of the rosaries earned by bugs through work are just funneled back to Farloom's church. In the underworks beneath the Citadel, we come across a clergy member who, for a fee, hears the confessions of the workers. This cleric is a machine, a robot programmed to spew the same answer, that they haven't worked hard enough, that religion demands more from them, and that faith will be their salvation. Then in the lore tablets of Deep Docks, where workers slave in the heat, and in Greymoor where dreg reapers are forced to task out of fear the Moorwing will literally eat them. We hear the enforced religious devotion of the Citadel. The docks demand a mark of fealty from all workers, and Greymore demands an oath of fealty alongside the Litany of the Worker, which details the bleak life beneath the church. It's not just workers. Pilgrims too are crushed under oppression. Tablets scattered along pilgrim routes leading to the citadel tell of how they must humble themselves. They must give up comfort and even their lives to cleanse sin before entering the citadel. No bug knows otherwise, for heterodoxy isn't tolerated. Sin and crime clasp hands in Farloom. Every sin, and trust me, there are a lot, is a crime worthy of sending penitents to the Slavs' prisons. In such an environment, questions become dangerous, and to challenge tradition or belief means death. Religious suffering is, at the same time, the expression of real suffering and a protest against real suffering. Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of soulless conditions. It is the opium of the people. The German theorist and philosopher Karl Marx viewed organized religion as a tool for the ruling class to keep the masses subordinate by offering short-lived moments of ecstasy through religious traditions. Other critics also claim it's like an addictive drug administered by those in power to keep the status quo. The rapture that the weaver's needle-in provides, compelling a bug to sing and obey, could be seen as Farloom's version of religious opium. Interestingly, Farloom encapsulates a contradiction in another commonly cited criticism of religion. Oppressive religious institutions have been associated with censorship, a stifling of knowledge that also limits scientific or technological advancement. But in the case of Farloom, we have a kingdom on the cutting edge of progress despite its authoritarian religion. A tube transport system, sluiceways, rotating chambers, factory lines, cogwork structures, and even artificial life. Though heterodox thought is mercilessly persecuted, it does little to temper technological progress. Thus, the church maintains its grip, and members of the choir are great hypocrites. Hidden behind gilded gates, the bugs of the citadel lived in pleasurable ease, with all the creature comforts they desired. Those at the top hardly lifted a finger to work, but admonished thousands of pilgrims for their weakness. Sadly, most pilgrims don't even reach the gates, and those that do are smashed to pieces by the judges of the blasted steps. The most tragic reality of this tyrannical religious state is that the hope constantly promised is itself empty. The myth of paradise within the citadel of song compels pilgrims to continue, but when we finally approach it, it's a silent, silk-filled hell like the rest of the kingdom. And the peace from work or suffering is also a lie. In White Ward, we see that sickness, infirmity, even death are denounced as sins, anything that prevents Farloom from humming eternal. Those who collapse from exhaustion have their souls lashed to eternal duty through these threshing machines which transform their spirits into silk lumiflies, then used to power Farloom's cogwork automatons. Silksong makes the point that religion is a powerful tool of oppressive states. The church indoctrinates all to ensure all follow its decrees. By controlling thought, notions of good and evil, and especially the hope of salvation, the citadel holds the kingdom in an iron grip. But this is just one of two prongs used. What the f***? If you've spent some time in the muck of Silksong YouTube comments and subreddit posts, you've likely come across one or several hundred people claiming Silksong is an indictment of capitalism, especially the stagnant, unequal late-stage kind, where the top 1% hold 95% of the wealth, where greed is celebrated and poverty an ethical flaw. I appreciate the sentiment, but this isn't entirely accurate. Capitalism is a subgroup of an economic model, of which there are four main types: traditional, command, market, and mixed. Traditional is an old-style model. Think hunter-gatherers, barter and trade, and subsistence agriculture. In a command economy, the centralized government determines production, investments, incomes, and the like, i.e. former Soviet Union and wartime Germany. Market economies, conversely, have such things determined by the decentralized, invisible hand of market forces like supply and demand. Many current national economies are mixed, taking the freedom of a market and reining it in with government oversight of a command model. Now, capitalism is a type of market economy, where means of production, investment, and capital are in the hands of private or free enterprise, and the objective of such companies and institutions is to accrue profit. In Farloom's case, the kingdom isn't a market economy, not even close. First, the Citadel of Song is entirely command. It controls the production in deep docks in Greymore and everywhere else. It controls the investment of infrastructure, and everything's owned by the state. We see in high halls the treasury, where Citadel bugs mint and regulate rosary beads. Second, the drive's not to gather capital or accrue wealth, though these are byproducts, but to ensure the state functions. The Citadel was made for one goal, at least initially, and all its resources are bent towards that goal. If anything, I'd sooner call Farloom a palace economy, or palace temple economy, where wealth flows into the centralized temple, which commands the disbursement to the masses. What I think most people have latched onto is the comparison between the Citadel and a consequence of end-stage capitalism, in which there's a huge wealth gap. And there is. The Citadel bugs are the few haves: running water, better food, grand living, while the vast majority of Farloom are the pitiful have-nots, eking out a sad existence for a few simple rosary beads. While this most certainly mirrors the wealth inequality of late capitalism, it's not the only economic model that can lead to this, and we've already talked about how Farloom is explicitly not capitalist. But I'm no economist, just an average Googler. Feel free to argue against me in the comments. Definitional tangent aside, I think we'd all agree that Farloom's system is oppressive. All the wealth, and therefore power, is possessed by the Citadel, the top 5% let's say, while the remaining 95% suffer. Loam is the sad case of the Citadel's economic tyranny. Heck, even his name is a little too on the nose. The choir views its servants as nothing more than a rich, fertile soil, literally dirt, where both their ideas can be planted and where the fruits of labor can be reaped. Loam works endlessly for an idea, for the hope of being elevated and entering the Citadel's paradise. It's this hope that is his prison. Unfortunately, Loam's not a unique case. All underwork bugs labor in hostile conditions for a pittance. Just look at this treadmill. They must then pay even to rest at benches, and gladly take money to a confessor for alms, only to be told they aren't working hard enough, and that only through work can sin be cleansed. In essence, the Citadel has made poverty a crime, a poverty few can escape. These bugs literally work themselves to death, but remain destitute, ensnared by a system that doesn't serve their interest. Greymore, too, echoes the sentiment in their litany of the worker, forced to endure slave labor for eternity. And this is what I think rests at the heart of Silksong's critique. A society built upon socioeconomic oppression is harmful to itself, and that when all things conspire against you, it's impossible to reach for anything better. The kingdom of Farloom is a scathing rebuke against tyranny through both religious and economic means. Bugs hear the splendor of the church and are caught in the rat race to grasp it, though it's always beyond reach. In Silksong, we see how dogma and indoctrination ruin society, maintain harmful social stratifications, and prey on the weak to enrich the powerful.
Notelia.
Hand in hand with themes of oppression are those of exploitation, and in Silksong we see exploitation of both culture and land. Again, I think some people have construed the message to be about the harm of colonialism, because that's the terminology they're familiar with. But in Farloom's case, we see the results of outright conquest, not colonization. Verdania, Karak, the Hunter's March, the Nameless Town, None of these were colonized, but rather consumed entirely by the Weaver's kingdom. It didn't send settlers or establish colonies. It raised kingdoms and destroyed their history. Farloom is remorseless in rooting out resistance, and we see war's devastation not just in the bugs lost, but also the ruination of their land. Karak used to be a blue paradise filled with water and life. Now, it's reduced to dry sand. Verdania, the seat of vital growth, no longer supports the living. These kingdoms lost their culture, their population, their way of life, but the land suffered just as much from conquest as the creatures that lived there. This exploitation through power runs alongside exploitation through technology. To build their factories, to power their cogwork bugs, to ensure clean water to their chambers, the Citadel diverted all natural resources to its center. It denuded the surrounding environs of their splendor. The toxic fumes of industrial machinery and silk capture are siphoned through the exhaust organ, which then belches out waste. After generations, this transformed bile water from pristine watery haven into the muck-filled swamp of today, and why the Stilkin hate so much the Citadel. We hear from this lore tablet: hate for their light, hate for their pins, for their waste poured thick and endless. Fill your hearts with hate, for power has now been claimed, and with it we shall punish. In our own world, we see how much harm has come to the earth in the name of progress. We see how people and their way of life are lost to war, and how industry and technology have stripped the earth of many resources. Perhaps not a primary thing, but one I think worth mentioning. In a world of creeps and untoward advances, Hornet's here to say that no really means no. These hilarious and awkward moments are superficial nods to a much deeper sentiment felt throughout Hollow Knight Silksong. Feminism. Now, if we consult Merriam-Webster for a very basic definition, feminism is belief in and advocacy of the political, economic, and social equality of the sexes, expressed especially through organized activity on behalf of women's rights and interests. There are many different feminist philosophies. Their thoughts are multi-layered, and the challenges they face very complex. In Farloom, we see a social critique of our own societies and the traditional roles males and females have played. There's a lot of discourse in the Silksong community on themes of motherhood, of mother-daughter relationships, of sisterhood, of badass female protagonists, and dark female villains. In all of which, I'd argue, we can hear a general call to feminism. Now, I want to preface this by saying I'm no expert on feminism, nor can I claim any personal experience, but I hope to do this theme justice, so please bear with me. For starters, femininity is inextricably woven into Farloom's DNA. We have the higher being, Grandmother Silk, as divine goddess who greatly shaped the kingdom's religion. Then came the Weavers, a sisterhood, an entirely female caste that guided Farloom for countless generations. And in the time of Hornet, we have a female protagonist and a large pool of female characters, bosses, and bugs throughout the ruined land. It's safe to say feminine ethos permeates the kingdom. Non-confrontational, emotional or illogical, incompetent and anxious, weak, intended only for domestic duties. These are negative female stereotypes destroyed by the characters seen in Hollow Knight Silksong, especially with our princess protagonist. Hornet is measured, confident, pragmatic, and unshakable. She's beholden to a strong internal ethic, and she doesn't mince words when others step over those bounds. She's a warrior and also a leader, greatly aiding Bellheart, Bone Bottom, Fleetopia the First Shrine. But her martial skill and strong character don't do away with classical female virtues. In Hornet, we also see humility, hope and faith, compassion. Though she's one of the most powerful beings in Hollow Knight, a literal demigod, she doesn't flaunt her abilities. And after helping pilgrims with wishes and doing good throughout Farloom, we hear her say to Pavo, "I've seen the scale of suffering wrought across Farloom, Pavo. And I will admit, fulfilling these requests may do little to affect the cause. Even still, I have found it a rewarding task. To aid another, the small warmth of it, I had almost forgotten." Hornet's also one who takes full responsibility for her actions, which we see in Act 3 when she works to undo Farloom's destruction, which she inadvertently helped cause. In the depths of the abyss, in ruined corridors and hostile chambers, Hornet embraces female optimism and empathy. She acts not like a god, but like a bug among others. Standing beside her is Chakra, the warrior cartographer, who embodies feminine traits of grace, affection, and support. Chakra is devoted to her master and works to help those who can't help themselves. What Silksong shows well is that such feminine virtues aren't weak. Hornet, Chakra, and others demonstrate empathy and understanding without being mats to walk over, nor do such characteristics suggest an inherent inferiority. But the edge cuts both ways, which, to me at least, demonstrates the sought-for equality of feminism. For every Chakra or Hornet, there is a Weaver who dominated, oppressed, did evil. Silksong shows that females, like males, exist along the entire spectrum between hero and villain. An equality in character, illustrating that bugs are bugs, or people are people. In a twist, we see the radical feminism movement of our world, dissolution of capitalistic and patriarchal-driven hierarchies, wholly embodied in Farloom. From Grandmother Silk and the Weavers after her, Farloom has been steered by matriarchal forces. Now, I don't think it's a specific commentary on sex or gender, but it's interesting to see that there's still much ruin and oppression that results from a female-oriented society. One could argue that the Farloom of our time has already transformed, from the rule of Weavers and Mother Silk. But you could also make the point that this encapsulates a sort of gender equality. Male or female, those who dominate others tend to do a lot more harm than good. Beyond feminism in the general sense, there are themes of motherhood, sisterhood, and a daughter's duty. Grandmother Silk, Moss Mother, Bell Beast, and others are all mothers that encapsulate the feminine quality of nurturance. Mothers go to extreme lengths for their children. Motherhood is an instinct that can push creatures beyond what seems their normal limits. It turns even weaker beasts like these into formidable foes. And I think what makes Grandmother Silk such a tragic, complex character is that she manifests an internal struggle between the desires of motherhood and the urges of pale beings. In Hollow Knight, the Pale King and White Lady had thousands of children, but they fed them to the void so quickly a parental bond couldn't be forged. But as we saw with the Pale King's affection for the Hollow Knight and the White Lady's towards Hornet, the instincts of a parent are impossible to fully snuff. A pale being, however, also has in their nature a need for devotion and subservience. Grandmother Silk elevated the Weavers to be not just her daughters, but also her worshippers, and to have these conflicting notions entwined made it impossible to reconcile the wishes of a mother with the needs of a god, ultimately setting her at odds with her first children. In Mother Silk, and then the Weavers, we also see a mother's shortcomings. Something integral to motherhood, and parenting in general, is an unconditional love for the child, but in both, there are suggestions of love qualified, if not outright hatred. Grandmother Silk felt betrayed by her Weavers when they went against her, rightfully so, and created another generation of children, not out of love, but a need to hide the pain. In creating Lace and Phantom, we hear Mother Silk's hatred for the Weavers, and also a qualification of the Silkspun. When weaving the two into existence, Mother Silk says despite their flaws, they are better than the Weavers. This kind of comparison and conditional love goes a long way to ruin both Lace and Phantom. And then, the Weavers also created a child they hated in Eva. They referred to her as the despised child, as a mistake and a flawed attempt at divinity. The statement here is that to forego nurturing and unconditional love is a failure on the parent and sows only woe. This goes hand in hand with a feminine theme of self-sacrifice. To create life, to give birth and to raise a child requires immense sacrifice. It's scary, it's painful, and it demands a complete shift in life trajectory. In making space for the next generation, a mother does away with her old self. But so too is their self-sacrifice amongst daughters, especially the eldest of a family who traditionally acted like a second mother, using her age and experience to help raise the rest of the household, putting her own life on pause. And this leads to a second theme, the challenge of expectation from mother to daughter. The weight of expectation thrust upon daughters by their mothers we see most vividly in Grandmother Silk's relationship first with the weavers and then with Lace and Phantom. The Pale Monarch elevated her first children expecting loyalty, fidelity, devotion. When the weavers rebelled, she felt the betrayal deeply. So pained that she created artificial children completely out of silk to undo it. In Lace's silk heart memory we hear in part, "Better a child spun frail than none. Better a child spun pure than them. One to wish our waking. From our silk, a child born loyal." Again, Grandmother Silk thrust her own hopes and her expectations upon her next children. These were desires, however, that Lace and Phantom had no say in, nor could they ever live up to them. Phantom, deemed a failure for their aging and withering, was cast to the exhaust organ like the rest of Farloom's refuse. Even Lace, the cherished child, felt the burden of Mother Silk's expectations. The siblings, in a needle-in memory, ask each other why Grandmother Silk created them and why they were so frail, so susceptible. In Lace, we see a rebellious daughter who despises her mother for creating such a vulnerable creature. But even so, she still wants her mother's affection, as we see how envious Lace becomes over Silk's fascination with Hornet. Face the Holy Mother who would fashion so cruel and crude a daughter as me. After all, it's you that she wants, is it not? But Lace underestimated Grandmother Silk's love, the inherent drive of a mother to protect her children. Even after Lace severs her arm and casts her into the abyss, Grandmother Silk uses up her life force to ensure the void doesn't consume her daughter, whom, despite the flaws and the failed expectations, she still cares for. In comparison with Lace, we have Hornet, who must reconcile the visions of not one, but 3 different mothers. Hera, the weaver who birthed her, the White Lady, the pale being who raised her, and Vespa, the bee queen who trained her. Hornet's time with all 3 is consolidated in the red memory. Hera sees her daughter as hope, a chance to step beyond her own lineage and grasp something greater. Weaver, guardian, queen, those are their desires, not your own, certainly not mine. Only if you resist them, you might see it, another hope beyond. Hera urges Hornet to abandon the expectation of the other weavers, but perhaps even those of her mothers. From Vespa is the expectation that Hornet will be a warrior who can defend herself. In time, they will come for you, those who fear your nature and those seeking to claim it. To survive our world, you must learn to sting, swift and sudden. There is practicality to this, but not without downside. To see the world as hostile is prone to leave a daughter jaded, devoid of compassion. Now, the White Lady's interaction is most interesting, because in it we see the current version of Hornet actually speak with the past version of Hallownest's queen within the memory. Alas, Spider's child, for our ways you will think us harsh, you will think us uncaring, unrepentant, and so we must seem, for such is the cost of our wish. On a superficial level, the White Lady could be speaking of her and the Pale King's method of imprisoning the Radiants. To create and kill thousands of their own children, hollowing them out as vessels for the void, as a wish to save Hallownest. But more deeply It speaks to the wish of all three of Hornet's mothers and their methods of guiding the princess. Strength, in mind, in care, in claw. Strength enough that I may live to see a world better than our own, or to craft a world as I desire. That was the wish of my mother, of my mentor, and of you. Each of Hornet's mothers passed on the strength of one attribute, and taken together, they represent an opportunity to refill the world with hope. The burden of expectation on Hornet is indeed heavy, but as we see her character grow throughout Silksong, they are a weight she ultimately proves to handle and encapsulates what it is to be a daughter. For what are children but hope? Hope for a stronger and better future than the one we leave behind. What would you do if power presented itself? It's a great temptation that threatens to corrupt regardless of the noble intent of those who grasp it. A common trope across both entries of the Hollow Knight universe is the seduction of power and how temptation can push one beyond their ethical limits. I think this is most acutely conveyed in the void-filled abyss. Void is a semi-sentient substance with much lore around it, enough for its own video. But simply, void represents power. It's described as such: seething, chaotic power, darkness without unity. In Hallownest and also Act 3 of Farloom, we see void tendrils corrupt and consume whatever they contact. Power that destroys bodies and bends wills. Naturally, void is also a great temptation. Void, yours is the power opposed, but yours is potential, eternity potential. In Hollow Knight, we see how the Pale King was seduced by Void's potential, and in Silksong, we see some of the Weavers follow a similar fate. The ruins of Weave Nest Absalom show Void research labs, and these Abyss lore tablets, which, granted, might not have been written by Weavers, but I am assuming so, read: "We hire, who see you seeking. Our shells yearn for your embrace. Erase our fear, eliminate our desire." The limitless power Void represents is a temptation not even higher beings can resist, but it's not the only example. The Weavers, after having won victory against Grandmother Silk, were so tempted by dreams of domination that they didn't discredit the Pale Monarch's religion, but rather assumed the role of divinities within it. When speaking of the Citadel and its religion, Maskmaker says, "A system, or a web they'd likely call it, a way to keep their mother sealed in slumber, and themselves free to lavish in their false rule." False because Weavers aren't truly higher beings. False because the nature of their origins wasn't truly divine. False because they lied and deceived. They were tempted by the rule of Farloom, and it seems perhaps First Sinner and the rest of the Slab apostates resisted such influence. The third generation of rulers, the Conductors, Architects, Vault Keepers, also followed the path trod before them. Conductor Balador tells us, "Is our state so bare, pilgrim? By the will of the conductors we once boomed, and this citadel shook at our decree. But the words, how hollow they echoed. The mantle of rule claimed greedily from Farloom's fading first children, those bitter weavers. It was yoke, not crown." The sad state of Balador and his people echoes with empty temptations. Another example is seen with the Citadel of Song and their experiments with the substance silk. Silk is soul woven into focus and purpose. It's a miracle substance that enhances vitality, longevity, and much more besides. Like Void, soul-infused silk represents power and potential. Citadel bugs were lured by its promise, which led to their destruction. Temptation pushed them to ghastly surgeries in White Ward, where bugs were injected with silk to extend their lives. And when that wasn't enough, to harness silk and soul of dead bugs and place them in automated machines. The seduction of power afforded Grandmother Silk an opportunity to influence minds through the haunting. Clearly, power and temptation are strong themes in Silksong, but in the protagonist Hornet, we see a being able to resist temptation, even when the call to power is woven into their very DNA. She's an example of how conviction, empathy, and other strong virtues shield one from corruption. In Conversation with the Caretaker on the Nature of Pale Beings, Hornet mentions that they all have an innate desire to rule over lesser bugs and demand worship. She herself feels this call as daughter of the Pale King, but her will is strong enough to resist the allure, and in so doing, the Princess of Hallownest spares all Farloom another long age of pale dominion. Experience and humility also guard Hornet against the allure of void, despite again being deeply connected to it. The White Lady during Hornet's Red Memory describes it as that void with which our family is forever linked. Making it even more impressive, Hornet resists it. In Act 3's ending, we see how Hornet, letting go of any desire to command the void, is saved by and acknowledged by it, which one could argue is more powerful than any being wishing to control it. Again, Hornet's character arc is masterfully written and shows us the heights our heroes can reach. Life, which you look for, you will never find. For when the gods created man, they let death be his share, and life withheld in their own hands. These were the words told to Gilgamesh, a mythological ancient Sumerian figure who once quested for eternal life. Our existence lives in the shadow of one truth, that we will pass, that all things end. It's the desire to evade death that pushes many in science fiction and fantasy to pursue immortality at all costs. And in our own world, it's what some researchers and transhumanists have called the Gilgamesh Project. But is death's banishment truly a blessing or a curse?
Even now, there are only embers, and man sees not light, but only endless nights.
If you've spent time with the Dark Souls franchise, there's a common thread of suffering brought by undeath in the Dark Sun. And again, in Sekiro, Shadows died twice. The region is afflicted by immortal life in the form of a curse. The markers of dead space drive mortals to madness and end ultimately in a convergence event of undeath and reanimated necromorph tissue. In Lies of P, it's notions of immortality through transhumanism that drive Simon Manus and his alchemists to dispense with all notions of human ethics on their path towards transcendence. Many thinkers in history, a lot smarter than me, would say a life without death isn't a good thing, and I'm tempted to agree. It's a concept I like to call the curse of immortality. In Hollow Knight and Silksong, we see several instances of bugs ensnared by this cursed quest. Hallownest had its soul sanctum, whose scholars wished to break through the mind's constraints and were convinced consuming soul would bring the immortality to spare them from the infection. In Farloom, the Citadel of Song's entire apparatus is bent on transcendence. Their MO is to preserve Farloom eternal. That hits quite on the nose, don't you think? The Citadel injected themselves with silk for generations to extend their lives and their mission. But this made them vulnerable to their own destruction. Silk-infused life brought them under the influence of the haunting. The Citadel was corrupted in its purpose. White Ward is a prime example of the cost of immortality. We see painful threshing machines that forcefully injected or stripped silk from a bug's shell. All the memories that linger here are of pain, of loss and torture, of dissolution of the self. So obsessed were they that death itself became a sin. The unraveled monsters are the fate of all those who pursue immortality. And Caretaker tells Hornet, just think of them greedily shoving the silk into their shells, the madness that overcame them, eternal life for mortal bugs. The desire for immortality burned like a fever dream in the minds of the Citadel. And then, we see the ultimate transhumanist ideal present in the Citadel's cogwork creations. These constructs are attempts at artificial, immortal life. The metal is infused with silk lumiflies, a bug's soul and its memories. An ingenious, if cruel, attempt at the eternal. They have no respite in death. They are continuing their work in life, but in no way they imagined, made to endure a cold, perhaps painful existence without their memories. The corpses of thousands who've fallen to pave the road for this science are found in this hidden chamber. The Hunter's Journal of Second Sentinel tells us, the talent and intelligence of this construct goes far beyond others I have witnessed. They seem less built as a tool to serve than an attempt at life itself. And in the cogwork choir bug, its core is filled with fine mechanisms, but that alone should not produce such a convincing mimic of life. The architects and bugs of the Citadel imbued metal with soul and life, all to ensure their Farloom would last forever. And I think the fate of the kingdom is proof again that immortality is indeed a curse. Thanks so much for watching this video on the main themes of Hollow Knight Silksong. Of course, these are just my own ideas. Please let me know your thoughts on themes, which you agree with and disagree with in the comments below. And if you're a fan of lore and storytelling, be sure to subscribe to the channel where content is uploaded frequently. I want to take a moment to thank all my patrons over on Patreon. Their support means the world to me and helps the channel continue to improve. If you'd like to become a lore luminary for access to me, written scripts, and early video drops, head to patreon.com/thelorebrarians to learn more. Until next time, go forth and explore the lore.